This is the fastest train on Earth. The French TGV, Train à Grande Vitesse. On its maiden run in February of '81, a modified TGV whipped across the French countryside at 236 miles per hour, smashing the world's speed record for wheels on rails. Today, these orange flashes cover the 300 miles between Paris and Lyon in about 2.5 hours by averaging 156 miles per hour. The TGV shells a dazzling steel couture, but the trains themselves are by no means the only stars of the French high-speed railroad. These special tracks deserve equal credit for the TGV success. TGV tracks have welded rails, concrete ties, and extra deep foundations for super stability under high speed. And all curves in the TGV system are extra wide to keep cornering speeds high. In May of 1982, the TGV line was extended south to Marseille, cutting in half the time it took to cross France on rails. What makes the TGV rolling stock able to take full advantage of this super track is the train's light weight. Unlike old-time steam and today's diesel locomotives, the TGV is all electric, so it needn't burden itself with a heavy fuel source. This leaves room for a huge motor, big enough to generate 8,500 horsepower. To prove its prowess, the French government had its model railroad race a low-flying warplane. The race went neck and neck, but the TGV triumphed at the wire. Dramatic proof that high-speed trains can compete with air travel. For almost a decade, British Rail has wanted a high-speed train for its heavily traveled London-Glasgow route, hoping to reach 150 miles per hour and clip an hour off the present trip. While France chose an expensive separate track system for its TGV, British Rail decided to gamble that its advanced passenger train, APT for short, could run on the same tracks as all the other trains in the British Rail network. The idea was to save money on track construction by building an ingenious new design feature into the APTs, turning them into trains that tilt. This tilt would permit them a bank of up to 9 degrees on either side, allowing the APT to take curves 40% faster than conventional trains. This design seemed a perfect union of low cost and high speed, and it was, until the honeymoon ended on its maiden test runs. Prototype APTs locked into the tilt position, making collisions with bypassing trains a dangerous threat. Today, the bugs have almost been worked out of the APT, but the project has cost British Rail a fortune, and it may be 1984 before the first paying customer is APT'd across Britain. That would be a full 20 years since the Japanese set the modern standard for high-speed rail travel. The bullet train, that's what the world has come to call the Japanese Shinkansen. Since 1964, the Shinkansen has carried an amazing 2 billion passengers without one single accident or passenger injury. An astonishing safety record, especially since frequency, punctuality, and speed have not been sacrificed to achieve it. The Japanese success is partly based in its CTC, a centralized traffic control system that eliminates the possibility of human error, leaving the driving to computers. This year, the Japanese expanded its Shinkansen network, building 2 new lines to reach Japan's last wide-open spaces. Its newest line, the Jetsu, required an invention of automatic sprinkler systems to melt snow and ice so that the Shinkansen could maintain high speeds in the dead of winter. These Japanese marvels get exquisite care. At night, the system is carefully checked by sophisticated machinery, and an army of maintenance men make sure that the conditions will be perfect for tomorrow's run. This isn't just a labor of love. The simple fact is that bullet trains and tracks require more preventive maintenance than every other rail system on Earth. Under high-speed trains, steel wheels and steel rails simply don't last very long. And excessive materials and labor costs ultimately send Japanese railroad engineers back to their drawing boards. What they returned with were nothing less than plans to reinvent the wheel.
Four, 3, 2, 1, start. Let's go.
In 1977, the Japanese National Railway began experimentation on something called a maglev, magnetic levitation vehicle. This vehicle might look like it's on rails, but it's not. It floats 10 centimeters above its guideway on a series of electromagnetic waves. The magnets along the guideway act to repel the magnets beneath the vehicle, to both levitate and propel the maglev along. Before each launching, JNR engineers pump the maglev's electromagnets full of liquid helium. The liquid supercools the magnets, making them super-efficient conductors for an extended period of flight. Once the vehicular magnets have been activated, a powerful electric pulse is sent through the magnets in the guideway, which makes liftoff and propulsion possible. The first Japanese maglevs had T-shaped slots to bring their undercarriage as close to the guideway as possible. Wheels were used to accelerate the first maglev to its necessary levitation speed. By 1978, the JNR scientists pushed their little maglev along an inverted T-shaped track to a record speed of 320 miles per hour. Twice as fast as their Shinkansen. After the race, they gave their brainchild a standing ovation and each other a pat on the back. But before too long, they realized the basic limitations of their T-shaped design. It was the wrong shape to carry passengers. So the Japanese National Railway's inverted T-shaped maglev was quickly revamped. To enhance its commercial potential, JNR gave its new vehicle a U-shaped undercarriage. Repulsive electromagnetic forces levitate the vehicle. And whenever it veers off course, repulsive forces keep it in line. The design offered room for passengers without changing the basic scientific blueprint. What makes the maglev go is the sequential reversal of magnetic polarity that simultaneously attracts and repels the vehicle, pulling and pushing it along its course. That was JNR's first U-shaped vehicle, which went into operation in early 1981. Like its T-shaped ancestors, the U-shaped maglev required auxiliary wheels to get it up to speed. The U-shaped design has already broken all the maglev speed records, the oldest of which were set far away from Japan. For Japanese scientists didn't invent the maglev. The Germans did. Just before World War II, German engineers dreamed of super speed trains that would be attracted to a magnetized monorail above. They patented a technique called attractive levitation, and their later designs were beyond even H.G. Wells' wildest dreams. Their schemes were sidetracked by the Second World War, but the German fascination with maglevs resurfaced in the 1970s when a handful of strange incarnations emerged. German corporations were locked in a maglev race years before the Japanese began their own maglev experiments. Today, these German firms have pooled their resources to race against the Japanese instead of each other. And this is their entry. Transrapid 05. An attractive magnetic levitation train that works on a set of electromagnetic principles distinctly different from the Japanese repulsive levitation technology. Germany's attractive levitation train is driven by technology called a long-stator linear motor. It's like an ordinary electric motor, in which alternating current is passed through copper coils to generate an internal magnetic field. Except that this motor has been cut open and then stretched out flat so that it can offer an enormous surface area as part of the attractive levitation guideway system. When a multi-phase alternating current is passed through the elongated motor, a powerful magnetic force travels down the guideway. This force is what speeds the German maglev down its guideway after its levitation magnets have been switched on. The Germans think their attractive maglev will be superior to the Japanese repulsive maglevs for a variety of reasons. Although its top speed will be slower, Transrapid 05 should require less energy to operate. Its guideway should be much less expensive to build, and most important, it's the only maglev ever to have carried passengers, hauling over 50,000 people during a 1979 trial. That test was so successful that the Transrapid Group is now planning to build the world's first commercial maglev, Transrapid 06, which has been designed to carry 200 people at over 240 miles per hour. Transrapid could make the wheel obsolete, and although it's a huge gamble, some Americans want a piece of the action. Out in the desert, there are big plans to build a German maglev linking Las Vegas to LA.
It's fascinating to think that the next generation of travel might be by almost what you might call a Buck Rogers type of futuristic design. And I would hate to think that we would leave out this possibility of having a magnetically levitated train moving along almost in a Disneyland or a Disney World mode of operation. I wouldn't want to ignore it. And if I didn't see it with my own eyes on a visit to one of their manufacturing plants, this would be the Germans' manufacturing plants in West Germany, to see how it moves in almost friction-free mode. And anytime you can show me a piece of equipment that will transport a payload with hardly any maintenance and upkeep, then I think American investors are going to be very interested in such a project.
10 million people make their Vegas pilgrimage from Southern California every year. But city officials think the maglev might give them even more reason to take the trip. This isn't the United States' first brush with the maglev. 10 years ago, believe it or not, America led the Japanese in the repulsive maglev race. This was the Magnaplane, Massachusetts Institute of Technology's 1973 model magnetic levitation vehicle. And this is its inventor, Henry Kolm, electrical engineer at MIT's Francis Bitter Magnet Laboratory. On a shoestring budget, Kolm and his colleagues conducted a series of experiments into repulsive magnetic levitation. Their outcome was a prototype system that looked like a scale model of the Japanese maglevs to follow. From refrigeration to guideway activation, remote switching, and electromagnetic design, the MIT Magnaplane was the first technological evidence that repulsive levitation could be more than a theory. From the beginning, the MIT group had confidence their maglev would work. And well, it did. But unfortunately, they turned out to be much better scientists than salesmen, and their federal funding was cut. Today, Dr. Kolm has put his Magnaplane aside, turning his attention to electromagnetic rocket launching, a defense project which stands a much better chance of getting off the ground.
Well, the Magnaplane was technologically successful, but politically a failure. We built a 400-foot completely operational scale model system, which was operated in Wayland at Raytheon, demonstrating all of the technology involved, from the superconductivity on board the vehicle to the remotely sensed vehicle position to the block switching, control, everything. And, the experiment demonstrated that it was feasible. A cost analysis was made which showed that it was economically acceptable, but then the project was terminated for purely political reasons.
This isn't the first time America turned fickle in its love affair with the rail. Once upon a time, railroad was Uncle Sam's middle name.
That whistle down the line, I figured out it's engine number 49. She's the only one that'll sound that way on the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe.
American industry used to build the world's best trains, but today the Budd Company is our last surviving railroad manufacturer. Outside Philadelphia, Budd's labor force has put together cars for subway systems and railroads for over 50 years. Stainless steel is the Budd hallmark, making their cars internationally renowned for quality and durability. Perhaps Budd's best-known product is America's fastest train, the Amtrak Metroliner. It runs frequent service between New York and Washington, D.C. John Darrah has been a Budd Company employee for over 40 years. Last summer, Darrah invited Nova aboard one of Budd's Metroliners and discussed its rather surprising past.
Average speed of this particular train on the New York to Washington run is probably in the neighborhood of 70 miles an hour. Its top speed is 110. We've been running 110 for the last few minutes.
110 miles per hour is a crawl compared to what this train could do 20 years ago.
Back in the 60s, we bid on a 4-car unit for the Department of Transportation, the Federal Railroad Administration. We were lucky enough to win a competitive award, and we built 4 cars at that time with the proviso that they had to go 150 miles an hour. We had difficulty meeting that schedule, but we're able to do so by putting a streamlined front end on, and we were able to get the 152 miles per hour. Shortly after that, we did get an order from Pennsylvania Railroad for 50 cars, so-called Metroliners, which would be required to operate at 165 miles per hour. And that was the beginning of high-speed transportation here in the Northeast Corridor. That was quite an experience because we had all welded rail and had been recently put in by the Pennsylvania Railroad and had not been badly worn by freight trains, and it was in good condition. Freight trains carry a very heavy load, 2 to 3 times that of any normal car. And that does deteriorate the track. Now what they've done, they've put in welded rail, they have concrete ties in an effort to help it. But we're doing a lot of track work at this time, and the track work is slowing us down.
Freight trains are the modern kings of the American rail. The freight companies own the tracks. So passenger trains like the Metroliner are forced to travel a rail network designed to handle much slower and heavier trains. High-speed train service has already been proposed for 19 intercity corridors across the United States. And so far, the brightest prospect is Southern California.
Train's going to Los Angeles. Smoking to your right, no smoking to your left.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for having me. And we'll see you for everything next month, maybe.
This is the San Diegan. Amtrak San Diego to Los Angeles local.
Sylvia.
Your attention, please. Ladies and gentlemen, Amtrak train number 579 is now receiving passengers. This train will stop at Del Mar, Oceanside, San Clemente, Santa Ana, Fullerton, and Los Angeles.
8 times a day, the San Diegans roll out of San Diego's Union Station, bound for LA and points in between.
579 is now receiving passengers.
Times haven't changed much around these parts of the American rail yards. Today's trips take 2 hours and 46 minutes, but only when the trains leave on schedule.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Amtrak.
In 1981, a small group of railroad men made some bold new plans to replace Amtrak's popular San Diegans. Their aim is to raise $2 billion so Japanese Shinkansen trains can take the San Diegans' place alongside Interstate Highway 5.
Thank you for driving Amtrak.
These businessmen call themselves the American High-Speed Rail Corporation. Their president is Lawrence Gilson.
Over 90% of all the inner-city trips taken in the corridor, Los Angeles to San Diego today, are on a single interstate highway, I-5. That's 90% of all the trips by all modes of transportation on a single road. And both the state of California and our independent market analysts believe that within a decade from now, that highway will be at capacity for its entire length between city center and city center, LA and San Diego. That means that we're talking about a highway trip length of at least 3.5 hours.
Beach Freeway northbound at Del Amo, they're talking about a couple of lanes closed for 2 hours, which would make it till 6 o'clock, right through the heavy drive time, and we're going to check with the CHP and see what that is. It doesn't sound good from here.
Metro Traffic, Jorge Antonio Alor. Ahora Aircable brinda doble ahorro en sus vacaciones.
Plane rides to San Diego take only an hour, but getting to Los Angeles Airport can take all day.
Welcome to LAX. Even when traffic is light, there's very often a bottleneck between the entrance to the airport and the first airline passenger terminal. The fastest way to get by it is to sneak around to the far right.
So Gilson's group thinks that the overcrowded LA market is ripe for the picking.
When you look at the alternative ways to provide some relief from that incredible gridlock, you look at the airlines. Well, the airlines are moving out of the LA-San Diego market, the major carriers. It's too short a distance to be economic for them. You look at the Amtrak conventional service. Well, there's a pretty severe limit on how many additional frequencies can be handled by Amtrak, given the track. You look at the bus, they're on the same road. So there's got to be some kind of relief if the economic vitality of Southern California is to be preserved.
And today's Amtrak San Diegan, however quaint, just can't do the job.
Now go down to the left.
What channel are we on?
Let's go. Okay.
Ma'am?
Five years from now, American high-speed rail sees the San Diegans replaced by 100 shiny Shinkansens, racing up and down the Southern California coast the same way they do in Japan, making the 127-mile trip between San Diego and Los Angeles in just 59 minutes. That will be almost 2 full hours faster than the San Diegan runs, faster even than airplane and automobile travel between downtown San Diego and downtown LA. But will Southern Californians ever really take to the Shinkansen and leave their driving to the Japanese? Gilson, his business partners, and the Japanese National Railway think that bringing Japan's bullet trains to California will be a marriage made in heaven.
The high-speed trains in other countries are operating at a profit. The Japanese system particularly has been operating since 1964, profitable every year since 1966. It's a very safe system, carrying over 2 billion people without any fatalities. So we ask ourselves, why not here? And the more we dug into it, the more we felt that there was definitely a market, that the technology existed, and that we ought to be able to attract private finance to build the system.
東北新幹線をご利用の方は上野から新幹線リレー号または
東北高崎線の普通電車が
Ladies and gentlemen, we will arrive at Tokyo Terminal in a few minutes. Please be sure that you have all of your baggage with you. We do hope that you have enjoyed your trip. Thank you.
God must have had the Shinkansen in mind when he created Japan, a land that seems tailor-made for high-speed trains. Japan is a country that's smaller than the state of California, yet it has 4 times as many people. And with so many intermediate stops within their sprawling urban areas, the Japanese have found their national railways to be much faster than airplane travel between city centers, and much more energy efficient per passenger than automobiles. But Shinkansens are the only moneymakers in the huge Japanese national railway system, a bureaucracy that, like Amtrak, is toppling under its own weight. Labor costs at Japanese National Railway are finally catching up to the rest of the industrialized world, leaving the JNR system teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. Selling some Shinkansens to California could signal an end to JNR's immediate financial woes, to be sure. But some of the bullet train's most ardent admirers admit that what works in Japan won't necessarily work in America.
今日成田からたまたまロスに向けて飛ぶので、なんかすごい偶然だと思うんですけども、アメリカってすごくバスとかがね発達してるし、航空機も発達してるから、なんか日本のようにうまくいくかなってちょっと思います。
なんか全体としてはいいですけどね、何か一点がね特に際立って日本はこの新幹線に結集されてるような感じはしますね。ソニーとかね、そういった何かこうカメラとかね、2、3のことについては非常に結出しているような感じがしますね。全般的には向こうの上でしょうけど。
そうですね、大体日本と違いまして、あちらの方でしたら、大地も広いですし、なんていうんですか、日本の場合トンネルなんか掘ったりして非常にまっすぐ走らせるために苦労してますね。そういう意味では日本で一生懸命せこせこ走っとった新幹線、広い大地で思いっきり走るっていうのは非常にいいことやないかと思います。そんなところですね。
But not everyone in Japan loves their Shinkansen, especially some of its closest neighbors. In the neighborhoods alongside the bullet train's tracks, many residents have complained of its deafening roar and seismic vibrations. So the Japanese National Railway has spent untold millions soundproofing houses, schools, and shrines in the shadow of the Shinkansen. A little-known fact outside Japan.
そんなに振動はしないです。今お家が建っちゃいましたからね、昔はあんまりこんな家がなかったんですよ。ですから振動が割合にねありましたですけど、今はねだいぶお家が建ってきたんで振動は少なくなりました。もう近くの方はねでもだいぶ振動があるらしいですよ。もうちょっと先になるんですけどね、この通りのちょうどね商店街のガードの下あたりはね、もう国鉄でもってね去年あたりから相当出して窓やなんかね結構。
This is Tokyo. But Californians might soon get the same vibrations, because the California legislature has exempted the new Shinkansen project from environmental review to attract private investment. The California lawmakers also guaranteed the American High-Speed Rail Corporation some crucial tax breaks and the use of public rights-of-way to build elevated Shinkansen tracks alongside the San Diego Freeway. Decisions that were even more music to the corporation's ears. But before the Shinkansens could come to wide America, America went to the land of the Shinkansen. July 1982, a delegation of United States senators and congressmen was invited to Japan. The Americans went to decide whether the United States should buy the Japanese bullet trains. And Japanese National Railways was only too happy to hand them a warm welcome.
On behalf of those of us who visit you from America and who have had the pleasure of having your representative with us in Washington to discuss the trade and the friendship between Japan and America, we thank you very much for this most gracious hospitality that you show. Our feeling is expressed by saying to you, Sendai Banzai, Banzai, Banzai. Thank you.
The first item on the American delegation's Rail Congress agenda was a courtesy call at the U.S. Embassy on Ambassador Mike Mansfield.
Senator, good to see you again. How's your husband?
He's fine. He's with me.
His guest list included Florida Senator Paula Hawkins, Representatives James Florio of New Jersey, William Lehman of Florida, and Adam Benjamin of Indiana, Minnesota Senator David Durenberger, and railroad entrepreneur Alan Boyd.
Sit down over there.
Farmers are down. That would be their second.
The embassy talk was of trains and of trade, a welcome diplomatic warm-up for the main events to follow.
It isn't anywhere near enough.
At the headquarters of Japanese National Railways, the delegation held a press conference to show their solidarity. National Railways President Fumio Takagi pledged his firm's complete technical cooperation for the Southern California and any other Shinkansen projects the Congress would like America to start. Then the pace of their whistle-stop tour picked up. Next up, the JNR Computer Technical Center, where the delegation checked out Japanese National Railway's amazing system of Shinkansen control by computer. Perhaps the most advanced technical achievement of Japanese rail.
These lamps are lit, indicating...
The Americans were then whisked off to the official residence of the Japanese Chief of State for yet another courtesy call, this time on Japan's Prime Minister, Zenko Suzuki.
Senator Hawkins.
Florida. Very nice to meet you.
Jim Florio.
Good to have you. Welcome.
Alan Boyd, Prime Minister.
Mr. Suzuki reinforced his National Railways commitment to helping the United States Shinkansen projects as much as possible, underlining its support within the highest levels of Japanese business and government.
I arrived on Wednesday.
The Japanese red carpet then rolled in the direction of their famous Shinkansen bullet trains. Past the grounds of the Imperial Palace, through the streets of downtown Tokyo, the motorcade approached Tokyo Station, where the Japanese National Railway would finally give the Americans a chance to check out the Shinkansen for themselves. The delegation took turns climbing up to the best seat in the House and wondering whether the Shinkansen could do for their districts what they do for Japan. From inside the cab, they could see the long arm of JNR's technical center at work, learning that Shinkansen engineers have little to do but check their computer controls en route. And so the Rail Congress had achieved its purpose, riding a Shinkansen train across Japan at 135 miles an hour in quiet, comfort, and safety. But the Japanese had one last technological treat in store: a look at their train of the future. At the Japanese National Railways Research Center, the Rail Congress was given a bird's-eye view of the Japanese latest U-shaped magnetic levitation train. While its newest maglev wasn't quite ready for VIP travel, JNR did stage a special test run of its rising star to interest the Americans in its long-range potential. By waiting just a couple of years for the great German-Japanese magnetic levitation race to be decided, the United States could have a golden opportunity to purchase ground transportation that would carry it into the 21st century. Because the maglev is already much more than science fiction.
The day is certainly drawing near when these unceasing efforts will blossom into a new form of long-distance, high-speed mass transport in Japan. The aspiration of the nation.
Well, this is the model of
The super speed and energy efficiency of magnetic levitation will probably make Shinkansen and all other rail transportation out of date. But neither the Rail Congress nor the American High-Speed Rail Corporation is in the market for a maglev.
Well, we looked at maglev, and I think that probably is the next generation of technology. And it's attractive and appealing to think about. There's no place in the world where it's currently in service. There's test tracks in both Germany and in Japan. But one of the premises we've committed ourselves to is private financing for the project. And it's simply unrealistic, in our opinion, to seek a multi-billion-dollar privately financed commitment for what would amount to a research and development project. It's not financeable in the present climate. That's one thought. The second is that when you're talking about a distance of about 130 miles and a train that can achieve a top speed of 160 miles an hour, which is what the Shinkansen bullet train technology can do, you have to ask yourself, is the additional cost of construction and maintenance for a higher speed train worth it for the shortening of the route in terms of time? And it's our feeling that 160 miles an hour is about fast enough.
Instead of the faster French TGV, the cheaper British APT, the all-American Metroliner, or anything else, the Japanese Shinkansen will replace Amtrak San Diego for reasons that are fiscal and political, instead of scientific. Public officials are permitting the American High-Speed Rail Corporation to make far-reaching transportation policy for Southern California. Alan Boyd resigned his presidency of Amtrak to join Larry Gilson at the American High-Speed Rail Corporation. Mr. Boyd's close ties to both sides of the Rail Congress have helped clear the tracks for the California Shinkansen. While Boyd was Amtrak president, Amtrak loaned American High-Speed Rail $750,000 to get itself started. And his new corporation was richly rewarded by the Japanese. The American High-Speed Rail Corporation was given $5 million by this man, Ryoichi Sasakawa. Mr. Sasakawa is a living Japanese legend, an 84-year-old philanthropist whose personal wealth has been estimated in the billions.
Great tradition. Volunteer.
Last July, Sasakawa awarded Mr. Boyd and the co-chairman of the American Rail Congress delegation his highest honor, membership in his exclusive fraternity of volunteer firefighters.
This is, we consider this highest honor.
We're most appreciative.
Yes, it is a great honor.
In Japan, Mr. Sasakawa is renowned as a leading political force, a behind-the-scenes kingmaker with considerable influence inside business and government. Sasakawa's $5 million gift allowed the American High-Speed Rail Corporation to conduct studies on the feasibility of building Shinkansens in America. In his own words, Sasakawa's extreme generosity is repayment for a debt he feels his country owes America.
これはアメリカの方でね、テキサスとかね、いろんなところからね、日本に言ってきていらっしゃるから。ところがやはりね、どんないい飛行機でも、どんないいパイロットがそれでも燃料がなかったら飛びませんから。最初はね、アメリカも金持ちですけれど、最初のね、海のもんと山のもんと成功するか成功するかわからない。それに金出すわけにいかんから。そういうね、基礎調査の費用は私の方で喜んでね、お手伝いをすると。何十本お付けになっても全部させてもらいます。ね、そうして私はアメリカに対してね、今日までいろいろ日本がね、戦後お世話になった。そのお礼返しを私はね、消防、空手、ね、詩吟、剣道、ね、1500万人から持ってるから、ね、それを代表してね、お礼返しをするということが一つ。もう一つは、日米がね、友好親善がね、完璧でなければ、ね、アジアの平和がありません。アジアの平和はなくして世界の平和がないって私は考え。アメリカは自由主義国。これは幸福につながる。だからアメリカと一緒になってね、世界の人類をね、健康長寿幸福を私は送りたいという考えでね、年中休みなしサラリーなしで働いてるね。
じゃあ最初に会長の方から上司の方に連絡された。
どうぞってお手伝いさせてもらいたい。こちら側ともされたい。
But skeptics believe there may be much more to Sasakawa's donations than an interest payment on post-war debts. 16 major Japanese firms do big business with JNR. So if America decides to import bullet trains, Japanese industry stands to make millions on the deal, including Sasakawa himself, whose huge shipping business would also benefit from hefty American trade agreements. JNR President Fumio Takagi allegedly made the first arrangements between Sasakawa and U.S. officials.
Last week I raised $98 billion in new taxes. Why can't Japan do that?
Mr. Sasakawa picked up the tab for much more than this Rail Congress party. His funds also paid the expenses incurred by both delegations of the U.S.-Japan Rail Congress for their entire session last July, including transportation to and from Japan.
How are you? Welcome to Japan.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here. Such a pleasure. How do you do?
So it should be no surprise that in Japan, Mr. Sasakawa has earned the nickname Driving Wheel of the U.S. Bullet Train, and also become the toast of American high-speed rail.
Dear Mr. Sasakawa, it gives us great pleasure to have this opportunity to acknowledge the extraordinary contribution you have made to the strengthening of cordial relations between our two countries through your support of efforts to introduce high-speed passenger rail service to the United States. We hope that the railroad as developed in California, in Florida, in the Midwest, and elsewhere in the United States will show us tunnels that may portend problems, but will always have lights at the end, ties in the rail that mean ties of friendship between our countries, the bridges that mean bridges to peace, and finally, the rail or the guideway that will show us how to go forward as two great friends in an improved world. Thank you very much. And would you add this to it?
California, here she comes. The Atchison, Topeka, and the Shinkansen.
Here she comes. Ooh. Hey, Jim, you better get the ring. Ooh. She's got a list of passengers that's pretty big, and they'll all want lifts to Brown's Hotel, 'cause